One of the things that a venture studio does is it embraces failure as a lesson and says, hey, we're going to pivot. We're going to go after this a bunch of different ways until we really find the right way to do it.
What's a success story or example of a company that came into the venture studio model and then the studio helped it and then it grew to its potential?
For an early stage venture is remove a lot of the distractions that are not kind of core to de-risking a young venture or an asset in the early stages.
And I think ADHD is one of the worst names, disorders, so to speak. The fact that I agree, I think of it as just a different brain type, but attention deficit, it's not a deficit of attention, it's a surplus. It's like we're paying attention to everything.
If it's a disorder of anything, it's an attention budgeting disorder. And my reaction to that now, later in life, is be more interesting.
Today, our guest is JT Benton, co-founder and general partner at 9.8 Collective and general partner at Bemore Venture Studio. Based in Bozeman, Montana, he's also an avid fly fisherman and active volunteer. An experienced entrepreneur and venture studio leader, JT helps founders and investors drive real measurable results. With a background in digital marketing and startup growth, he brings sharp insights, witty humor, and a passion for innovation to every conversation. Hey, it's Steve. Real quick before we begin, the single biggest thing I've learned about succeeding as an ADHD entrepreneur is that everything boils down to mastering your weeks. So if ADHD is making business harder than it needs to be, I've got something that can help. Grab my free weekly ADHD dashboard. It's a free, simple, but powerful tool to help you stay focused, organized, in control of your week. The link is in the description below. Hey everybody, Steve August here, ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator Podcast. So good to be back with you today. And you know, one of the great things about having a podcast, and one of the reasons I do this, is I get to talk to really interesting people doing really interesting things. And I'm delighted to say today that I have yet another person who I've met that I want to introduce you to, that I think you're going to be really intrigued by on so many different levels. And so today we have on our show as a guest, JT Benton. Now, JT is an entrepreneur focused on powering exponential innovation through the venture studio model. With experience spanning many industries as a founder and an operating executive, he now helps venture studio operators and investors maximize impact. He's based in Bozeman, Montana. JT is an avid fly fisherman, which makes sense if you know anything about Montana, who frequently volunteers with local and national charitable organizations. JT, welcome to the podcast. So great to have you.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Really enjoyed the topic to jump into it all. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you bet. Now, where in the world do we find you today?
As you said, I'm in Bozeman. I'm in my home office upstairs. Yeah, I'm in Bozeman, Montana. Just living the dream.
Nice. Yeah, Montana's a gorgeous state, so much place of natural beauty. And I believe is the license plate the Big Sky State?
We got a bunch of different licenses, but we are the Big Sky State. I used to always laugh about that before I moved here. Like, how could the sky be any bigger? But it is true. Our sky is big. I'm not sure why or how, but somehow it's bigger here.
Yeah, wide open spaces, I suppose, makes the sky bigger.
Wide open spaces, big mountain vistas. It's a big place, right? I often refer to it as cold Texas. We're pretty spread out up here. A collection of smaller cities or bigger towns, and then a lot of small towns as well. A lot of, as you said, a lot of open space.
It's great to have you. And, you know, it's interesting because you're in Montana and, you know, you're running a venture studio. So why don't you tell what you're doing right now? And then we can dig into some very interesting questions I have for you on this thing. But I don't know that everybody's actually familiar with the venture studio model. And so this would be it'd be great to hear what your take is, your description of what you do and how you do it, who you help, and how you help them.
Yeah, so let's start there. A venture studio is a company that systematically builds other companies, and it plays three principal roles. It's an entrepreneur, it's an operator, and it is a funder, right? An investor. So that's different than some of the sort of early stage value creation entity types that people might be more familiar with, like an incubator or an accelerator or even a early stage venture capital firm. Venture studios actually build the companies from within. They operate against a thesis, and then they invent a bunch of different concepts or ideas that might go serve that thesis. So a good way to think about it is venture studios are really good when the problem you're looking to solve is best served through an N is greater than one solution set. right? So we're going to try a bunch of different things or multiple different things to go address that problem. That's what a venture studio is. What I do, well, I'm a principal in a venture studio, but mostly what I do is support the venture studio ecosystem across a few different stakeholders. Within the 9.8 collective, we provide the operating system, frameworks, tools, expertise, and talent to help both emerging and mature studios to achieve their targets, more efficiently, more cleanly, more capital efficiently. My partners and I also formed a global nonprofit, which is called the Venture Studio Forum, a global trade association, if you will, for venture studio operators, investors, and supporters. And within that entity, we seek to really formally define the asset class and then lift it up through a bunch of different benefits, rigorous research, community building, best practices, and thought leadership. We make that available for free to studio ecosystem stakeholders around the world. So really at the center, or my partners in my ecosystem, is this new form of company creation, which has a tendency to outperform the others, but is not totally understood by the venture capital, economic development, university research kind of ecosystems. And so we're helping to kind of like bring that forward.
No, it makes so much sense, having been part of the traditional venture model and seeing what that looked like, and being part of the traditional private equity model, which looks, a certain way. This sounds really interesting in terms of a different path, that you're not just, putting, money on the table, but you're actually helping to operate and helping to actually nurture the business. I'd be really curious, and I think it'd be really helpful for listeners and watchers if you're on YouTube, to hear what's a success story or an example of a company that came into the venture studio model, and then, the model helped it, the studio helped it, and then it grew to its potential, or at least it was on its way to growing to its potential.
There's just a whole bunch of them. I also host a podcast. And so a couple of weeks ago, I had the founder of Science Inc., a guy named Mike Jones, come on the podcast, and he talked about what they've done at Science. So Science was behind Dollar Shave Club and Liquid Death, and literally dozens of other ventures that have done really, really well. And I think what a venture studio can do for an early stage venture is remove a lot of the distractions that are not kind of core to de-risking a young venture or an asset in the early stages. We call it like the -1 to 0 and the 0 to 1. When you're really just looking to validate that this is the business that the world needs. And so what a venture studio can do is it can take a small founding team and say, hey, you all go focus on servicing the problem, solving the problem, and building a business around that problem that can make money, right? That can achieve unit economics that are fundable, or at the very least sort of can get that business to default alive. And the tasks that the studio can remove from that founding team are ones that are just sort of like general administrivia, all the way to core functions of company building, but they don't relate to that. Hey, let's go build product and ship product and make sure that we've got a real business here. So what are those? That's like HR, legal, DevOps, sometimes revenue operations or go-to-market. Although I tend to think that those should live within the go-to-market function should still live within the venture. But basically removing distraction so that we can much more quickly and capital efficiently go prove that this thing needs to exist.
Having gone through that process as a founder, that would have been so helpful in because there's so much you have to come up to speed on, and a lot of it is that what you call that administrivia of I need to figure out what the insurance plan is for I need to do all this other stuff that wasn't central to the mission of the company, to landing our next customer or figuring out what the business model ought to be. It was a lot of necessary company building work, but not the most impactful thing that the founding team probably could have done.
Extra stuff, right? And it is, to your point, it's not that it's not important, but what's really important is that you have found your market, that your market really sort of pulls on your product. Not that they'll buy it if you push it, but that they really want it. and that you've provided a solution for them that really addresses their pain point, right? Their pain points. And so if you take a lot of that other stuff and you make sure it gets done, but it gets done by people who are really expert in that, right? They're horizontal experts. It allows the vertical expert to go to work and build very, very quickly. What happens when we apply that model and we put, the right systems and tools in place is that the ventures themselves tend to outperform either standalone or traditionally funded ventures by a pretty wide margin, actually. And so slowly but surely, the world is kind of waking up to this concept, and we're at this really interesting moment where we believe this is like the new way to build companies, right? And so it also plays really well to a person with ADHD who says like, hey, I understand the problem, but like, I'm not done having ideas, right? I might have been wrong or maybe a little off in my first solution. And so one of the things that a venture studio does is it embraces failure as a lesson and says, hey, we're going to pivot. We're going to go after this a bunch of different ways until we really find the right way to do it. And that eliminates this really ugly thing in venture building or startups, which is confirmation bias, right? So let's just frame it in another way. If I have an idea for a company, a startup, and I go to a VC firm and I say, hey, I want to build this company, and this is the solution it's going to provide, and this is the market that it's going after, and here's the service obtainable market and the total addressable market and all the stuff that we're trained to do in our pitch decks, and I get money. Immediately, I have to prove that thesis and that path to be the right one. And that's great if it is, but what if it's not, right? I'm going to spend the rest of my time trying to prove this thing that might not organically be true because I told people to invest and they did invest based on that premise. In a venture studio model, I might say, I have a thesis that I want to go after that speaks to a problem that exists in a market. And I believe the best way to serve that market is through companies that do X, Y, or Z. And so I'm going to build a few of them. And so what you're investing in here is my ability as a studio operator to go out and build several of those ventures that address that primary concern. And about half of them are going to be successful in meeting their market and growing and scaling. And about half of them I'm going to shut down really fast. Right. I'm gonna embrace that, just because it didn't work doesn't mean we didn't learn something, and we can develop pattern recognition. And that performance is significantly greater than the performance we see from venture-backed startups. And so we have an advantage. We can build companies faster, better, more cost effectively. Sometimes they don't reach the huge outcomes that power law investing or venture capital investing might create, but very often they do. And you also get a lot of winners that are, singles and doubles. And so the value created for the financial supporters, the investors, the principals can ultimately be much greater.
You're also likely creating more capital efficient businesses because they're getting the support to get to the market faster. And so even they may not need as much capital to get to where they're going, right? So the returns become better simply because they're making them more capital efficient. Whereas the venture model is just, we have this much money we're going to throw at these companies and we're going to ride, hopefully get a unicorn or two, and that'll be our return.
So both of those things are true, right? So you can get a company to its like sort of default alive status much more quickly. And then that company can create its own runway moving forward and need less capital. You can create the basis of performance that underwrites a venture's worthiness of more capital and validates it for its Series A, its Series B, its Series C, its ultimate exit, right? And those aren't the only kinds of companies that we can build through this model. Some of my favorite studios are actually not looking to build venture scale businesses. They're looking to build Main Street businesses. They're looking to create economic development impacts that are largely passed over by venture capital, which really needs a big win. And so the impact you can have on a community, for example, by building businesses that achieve profitability and cash flow positivity more quickly, is that those businesses stick around and there are more of them out there to hire other people, to employ people, to build a tax base, to keep people in a college town working there. So the impacts are more broad and widespread than quote unquote unicorn chasing or chasing alpha.
So you mentioned like founders often are ADHD. I think it's part of the superpower in terms of like connecting things. And you have your own connection with ADHD as well. And I'm just curious to know what your journey has been with ADHD, and was it something you were diagnosed earlier in life or later in life? So how did ADHD first show up for you in life?
I was in second grade. My folks got a phone call and said, "Hey, we got to have you to the principal's office. Things aren't going well at school." And so I was pulled into the principal's office. I met my parents there, and the principal said, "Hey, we're going to move JT to the portables." The portables were literally trailers, like modular buildings behind the school. This was in Tempe, Arizona. I don't think they had air conditioning, which is like, yeah, got to be a health hazard. But in any event, yeah, I mean, they were going to put me in special education. And so my parents said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, JT can't read." And my dad was like, "Well, that's just not true. He reads all the time. Show me the book that he's reading or that he can't read." And they had like two or three words in them. Like it was just like, it was such a joke. And so my dad ran out to the car. My family had a Volkswagen camper van that we traveled, got one of my fishing magazines out of the car and said, "Hey, read this." And so I read it. And then he, asked me questions about it. And my cognition was great. And the principal's response was, "We don't really know how to deal with that. Like, he's not going to read fishing magazines here. These are the books that we read." And so my folks took me to a specialist, and I was diagnosed, and we found a school in Phoenix that had smaller class sizes and kind of built the curriculum around the students and what their curiosity was. So, second grade, I came to understand that I was going to intake information differently. And I also came to understand that I was different. And, the first way that I came to understand that was that I was less than. And so, that stuck with me for a while. I'm sure there's still little shades of that in my life, but yeah, I've kind of navigated pretty much life ever since then, understanding that my brain runs a little bit differently, that my decision-making process may be a little bit different, that impulse control is going to be a challenge. Later in life, I I've got two boys. They're both ADHD, and so yeah, it's been a pretty common thread throughout. Candidly, I think it's mostly been an advantage for me. I can see around corners. I can work on really big picture outcomes that matter a lot. I tend to sometimes be a little bit aloof to detail, or administrivia, as I sometimes refer to it. I've gotten better at that for sure through systems and little hacks. But yeah, it's been pretty darn near central. I spend a lot of time mentoring people who are going through it. Maybe they get a diagnosis later in life, or maybe they have kids that are being diagnosed and they're concerned about it. I truly think it's a superpower. I think it's almost criminal that we call it a disorder, right? You often see people who have ADHD test very well for, intellectual scoring and for creativity and yada, yada. And yet we're still calling it a disorder, which I think is really kind of messed up. But yeah, it's been part of my life really throughout.
Yeah, I mean, I think ADHD is one of the worst names, the disorder, so to speak. The fact that I agree, I think of it as just a different brain type. But, attention deficit, it's not a deficit of attention. It's a surplus. It's like we're paying attention to everything. And it's more about like controlling that attention. And one of the reasons I was resistant to my own ADHD diagnosis was I was never hyper. I was never in my life. So it's like, oh, I'm probably not that, because it just conjures pictures of kids bouncing off the wall. So its name does it a disservice, and I totally agree with you that thinking of it as a disorder.
I was going to pull on that a little bit. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if it's a disorder of anything, it's an attention budgeting disorder,
Yes.
right? And my reaction to that now, later in life, is be more interesting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Find out what I'm curious about and communicate with me there, and you'll get lots of my attention. But if you drone on, and ask me to kind of live inside the box, yeah, it's going to be very difficult for me to engage, right? And so I just think we're different. We're very often high achievers. And so again, to call it a disorder might be a disservice. It's more a function of curiosity. We're going to really, really deeply engage on the things that we're curious about. And you'll get an exceptional level of focus and attention on those things. But attention is kind of a market thing. It's like a currency, right? So if people aren't paying attention to the things that you want them to pay attention to, some of that is merchandising, some of that is branding, some of that is like communication style, and making it interesting. And so my hat's off to the folks out there who realize that it's a two-way thing, right? It's not just like, did the people engage? It's like, did we make it compelling so that they engaged? And did we meet them where they are to deliver that? And so, we could certainly use a lot more of that in life, but yeah, I think it's more of a budgeting and curiosity thing.
Yeah, it's so important to think about that. One of the mottos we have in the ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator program is make the important interesting, because everything that's interesting is interesting, but everything that is interesting isn't always important. And so, and often, especially as you get into the third or fourth or fifth iteration on something, which is part of the entrepreneurial journey, is it gets less interesting the more you're involved with it. So we find ways to make the important interesting. And I think that's your call out on make it more interesting is just 100% on the mark. Yeah. So in terms of so we talked about the superpowers. For you, have there been challenges as well that have come with your ADHD brain?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the not interesting stuff, right? It's that sort of rote kind of muscle memory stuff process. My first instinct when I see sort of complex processes or repetitive processes is that they are, really taxing for me. Whereas if somebody said, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish, I might get there right away. Right. But if somebody handed me a playbook and said, hey, go do these things, I'm going to struggle. So those are hard, for sure. Time management is something I think we all struggle with. And, how we sort of budget our time for different things has been a challenge. Impulse control is a really tough one for folks with ADHD. I'm no different. So, I'll jump in and start contributing to a discussion, despite the fact that it's not time to do that, right? I'll solve what I think the question is or the problem is while it's still being communicated. I'll interrupt. Those are things that I don't love about my personality, but I am all too sort of prone to do them. And I think that those are big struggles. There's this and I forgot the term, you might know it, but when we receive critical feedback, we become dystopic, right? It kills us. When we receive praise, we sit on top of the mountaintop. So there's this peaks and valleys thing, that I think a lot of us struggle with.
Yeah. Rejection sensitivity.
What is it called?
I think it's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I think is the fancy name for it.
Not dystopia. Yeah. Dysphoria.
Yeah.
RSD. Yeah. I mean, so we have that, right? I can be pretty sensitive to critical feedback, even though I love it. It's just in the moment, I want to defend the work of, that sort of thing. It can feel like a bit of a hand slap, if you will. So those are things that I've struggled with for a long time. But again, right, like I've also come to understand that there are some things that I'm just way better at than your average bear, right? And so I tend to try to find work that allows me to do the things I'm really good at. And I tend to try to partner really well with folks who have a better understanding of the things that I'm not good at and who are not taxed as much by them, right? For example, I really have never met a stranger. I can become curious about a person just very naturally, which means that I can learn and develop empathy for them without it feeling hard, right? If I'm in a group of people or in an event, for example, and somebody has something to say that's interesting, I'm not thinking about the stress of approaching that person and having a conversation with them. That part's really easy for me. And so I always just try to look, there's real value in those things, right? And a lot of folks would really struggle with that, right? They would think, okay, what is my process through which to go talk to that person? Let's go talk to them, right? It's a little person. Let's go learn. And so, while yeah, there have been challenges, I think the benefits have far outweighed them.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of your techniques, for speaking to those challenges or addressing this, one is put yourself in a position where you're playing to your strengths to begin with. Right. But what I'm curious, because into every life, some tedious rote work must fall, like the rain. What works for you these days in terms of like when it is, okay, I have to like do this kind of focus work that I'm not 100% like, it's not triggering my interest level. Like, are there any techniques or systems that you're using that you find that are helpful for those situations?
Sure. Yeah. I time box it, right? I lock time up and I avoid distractions when I'm dealing with it. I'll go to a quiet place. I'll turn off my Slack notifications as an example. Kind of set my cell phone aside, something like that. I'll let the people who are important to me know that I got to do something that's going to be a little bit sort of taxing for me. And so I need to work without distraction on it. So that's one. I take breaks. There's this like muscle through it and just get it done. Sometimes that works for me. Other times I'm like, this is so difficult for me, so frustrating that I'll get to the 50% mark. I'll go take a walk, right? I'll, go outside. That's the thing I do. Actually, this is a good one. I spend a lot of time outdoors, an unreasonable amount of time outdoors. And so if I'm chewing on something that's difficult that requires me to really kind of break it down to its core components, just literally the physical place or the environment that I'm doing it in will impact my ability to get it done in a good way. And so sometimes I'll just change my venue and do that. Another thing I'll do is I'll look for help, right? I'll say to somebody who's really good at those things, like, hey, I'm struggling with this and it's really blocking me and it's frustrating me. You want to kind of share this part of the project with me? And then, maybe some of that more peopling kind of stuff that, out in the open kind of big picture stuff that person may struggle with. Like maybe I could take some of that from you and, just try to like build swim lanes based on our kind of superpowers, right? And like the things that we do that really fulfill us.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Sounds like you've sort of got a toolbox of things that you use. And that being outside and being in movement, I just think that has just a huge impact. I know just recently I've just gotten into a really good groove with my morning workouts and things like that. And I just noticed such a huge difference when I'm able to stay on that track versus when I'm more sedentary. So I think, we're always got to meet our brain where it is, and it's going to change from day to day, but that kind of base level care of our brain and being outside and, being able to be in movement, I think really supports that. That's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience. And it's fascinating what you're working on. So if folks wanted to learn more about you, if they wanted to say, hey, a venture studio idea sounds pretty cool, if they want to, get more information or even apply, if they're a studio or if they're an entrepreneur, what should people do to find you?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. And one I always appreciate. I try to ask that question in my podcast as well. I'm really focused on like driving connection, struggling with ADHD, and there's no commercial value to us knowing one another whatsoever. That's totally cool. Please still reach out to me. I'd love to be a resource to you. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's the easiest place, just JT Benton. We don't have to work together. If there's something that you're struggling with and something I said was helpful and you want to go a little deeper, we'll make time for it. Give me a little space, but I'm happy to do it. For those of you who do want to learn more about venture studios as a value creation mechanism, best place to do it is actually this nonprofit that we've launched. It's the Venture Studio Forum. So that's venturestudioforum.org. It's free to join, and there's just tons of resources out there for folks who want to learn more about it. We kind of created that as like a worldwide lobby for folks to come in and get in there and soak it up. So I would invite you there. We do live events. We do all sorts of cool stuff there. And if you're looking to build a venture studio and you want help with that, right? You need the systems, tools, frameworks, kind of methodologies. My company's website is 9.8.co. The number 9, the word point, the number 8.co. And you can find us there. And if you want to engage with me directly and you're looking for the right sort of inbox to hit, typically LinkedIn is the best way to do it again.
That offer for anybody with ADHD, that's one I extend as well. It's so helpful to be talking with other folks who get that brain type and get how your brain works and can help point you in directions that are supportive. And JT, I just really want to thank you for being on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks for sharing everything about your venture studio model and everything you're working on and your experience with ADHD. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I love the work that you're doing. This was a lot of fun. So thank you, Steve.
All right. That's what we got for this episode. Tune in next time on ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator. And of course, if you like this episode, give it some rating, give it some love out there. My goal is to support as many ADHD entrepreneurs as possible. And you spreading the word, giving it a review. If you're on YouTube, give it the like and subscribe. That helps us help more people. So that's it for today. Have an amazing day wherever you are. And we'll see you soon again on ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator.